Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me over. Really chuffed to be invited, so thank you. So today we're going to, I guess, talk about Blacktown Council's experience, and just to provide some context, Blacktown is Sydney's largest council. It's a rapidly growing council, both in terms of greenfield and infill areas. And I think it's got a population of about 400,000. It's roughly the same administrative population as the ACT. So we're going to talk about, I guess, the history that we've been through, but really we're focusing on the infill side, not the greenfield side. So we had a previous on-site approach to managing water quality. We're going to talk about some of the problems with that. We're going to present an alternative, what we call a precinct scale approach. Talk about some of the reasons why we did that. Talk about the costs and benefits of that approach, and discuss how the approach is being implemented. So just to provide context, that's an aerial photo of the infill areas of Blacktown. It's largely been developed since the 1970s. The Northwest Growth Centres is north of that, and it's largely greenfield development. So just to reiterate, we're talking about infill development. So this is a trip back in history. This is a view of Breakfast Creek. Breakfast Creek runs, roughly through here. So this is an aerial photo of Breakfast Creek in the 1970s. You can see it's already incised, practically no riparian vegetation, probably got a directly connected impervious area of about 20%. And really this is, I guess, the beginning of the end of this creek. You look at that creek system today, 90% directly connected impervious area. It's got more riparian vegetation than it did have. The right-hand side you can see has been cleared and it's currently undergoing rehabilitation. So rehabilitation involves creating a low-flow channel, armouring that with some, pretty substantial sandstone, getting rid of the weeds and planting native veg. At Blacktown, we protect water quality through development control plans, and the plan was called Part J. It required best practice management of all developments in infill areas. So we talk about 85% removal of TSS, 65% removal of phosphorus, 45% removal of nitrogen. So they're the water quality targets. It also required compliance with waterway stability, on-site detention, and water conservation to be addressed, where it wasn't being addressed through the New South Wales state government policy. It's quite a good example of an integrated water cycle policy. So water quality, is about protecting the biological and chemical quality, and to some extent the physical quality of creeks. Waterway stability is about making sure those creeks aren't eroded every time it rains. We do that through something called the Stream Erosion Index. However, the Stream Erosion Index is really a geomorphic tool, and it's not an eco-hydrological tool, and I think it misses the mark in that respect. And in this context, we're talking about creating, millions of additional square metres of paved areas. And for each million square metres of paved area we create, we add another 0.5 gigalitre of water down the creeks. That's, on top of the existing flow that goes down there already. Costs a lot of money to armour all of our creeks. Obviously, it has major ecological implications. So future development within the infill areas of Blacktown has been identified to occur in four urban renewal precincts. You can see on that slide. I guess it's a good thing to limit that urban renewal to those areas that confines the impacts on the receiving waters, to those receiving waters immediately downstream of those areas. We need to accommodate another 55,000 people within those precincts. So we've done some modelling of that. We're going to add another 2 million square metres of impervious area, leading to another 1.14 gigalitres of water going down those creeks every year. Look, there's no question it's critical to mitigate that impact, but the question is, where is it critical to mitigate those impacts? And I pose that question in the context of Breakfast Creek, which is the main creek that runs through those built areas. I've mentioned they're already highly degraded, but we've got the large first order creeks, Ropes Creek, Eastern Creek, etc., which really should be the focus of our attention. They're not armoured. There's no way we could armour them. They're massive. It would be a $1 billion project to try and armour them. It would also be a massive ecological loss. So on top of the GIS modelling, we then took that data and we dropped it into a music model to try and estimate the extra loads. And a little bit politically incorrect, but I think you can see this urban development will generate enough nutrients to keep a jihadi bomber in business for quite a long time. So, I mentioned previously we required stormwater treatment to be treated on-site. We received two main responses. One was bioretention and the other one was filter cartridges. So that's an example of the bioretention response that we got. And just to pick up from Andrew's, the previous speaker's indication that future development in SA is largely going to be smaller mum and dad developers. That's exactly what we've got at Blacktown. It's opportunistic. It's not done by Mirvac or Lend-Lease. It's very much shoehorned into the development. There's no way that we can capacity build all of these small developers. So, we really wanted an integrated response, but it's very clearly not integrated. That's an example of a cartridge filter system. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them. Water flows into the chamber, fills up the chamber, enters the cartridges. It's polished by perlite, zeolite, other filter media, and it flows out cleaner. So council received a lot of complaints with respect to the on-site requirements. We had an overzealous DA assessor who was making everybody's life quite difficult. It was taking a lot of time to assess it. It was very costly. We've seen that the responses were shoehorned. But really the biggest risk is that once these systems were built, nobody was actually going to maintain them. And the evidence shows very clearly that people weren't spending money on maintaining them. So council resolved to comprehensively review, its development control plan. That's another example of a bioretention system, built in very limited open space on a townhouse development. So it actually sterilises that space. It's also, quite weedy. So we engaged a panel of experts, including Tony Wong and some public policy experts and urban development industry representatives. They all endorsed council's policy. But then also council staff recognised that there was a potential opportunity to do something off-site, and so we started looking at developing a precinct scale approach. We commissioned quite a detailed feasibility study, probably more detailed than most strategic planning I've done in the past. And on the one hand, we knew what the load of pollution was that we needed to mitigate, and we had no idea how many treatment systems it would require to mitigate that. So we basically just went about designing 20 systems, and eventually, we went through this iterative process and we matched up the number of treatment systems with our target pollutant load reductions. In the end, we came up with 11 systems. So just to talk about where offsets are appropriate, they're not appropriate everywhere, but in this example, you can see that you've got a sensitive reach of a river shown there in orange. You've got development upstream of that. And in this context, it's really important to have your stormwater treatment, upstream protecting that reach. This is very much the context at Blacktown, where you can actually provide the treatment anywhere along that river system, because our downstream rivers, our larger rivers, are now the target of our protection. We don't have to worry about Breakfast Creek anymore. It's gone. So this just puts that same thing in context. The blue shaded area is the proposed urban renewal precinct. We don't have to have the treatment located here. It's quite appropriate to locate the treatment, in the other two locations shown. We can achieve the same net impact on that, the main river there, which is Eastern Creek. So the feasibility study showed it's both economically viable and physically possible to construct precinct scale offset systems. The approach would be funded by developers through contributions, and it would apply in those 4 urban renewal precincts. There's the locations of the 11 systems that we developed. We've actually got 2 areas there, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. So all the systems are located on council land. We had to take a really open view of this. We had to rethink the engineering involved. We weren't going to be constrained by gravity, so we've looked at using pump stations. We worked out that it's much cheaper to put in a very large pump station than it is to dig 3 million cubic metres out of the ground and dispose of that. And that includes the whole life cycle costs of those pump stations. So the idea is to also use some of our sports fields and to turn them into large grassy bioretention systems. So where we can, we're co-locating the treatment systems on sports fields. Sounds like a daft idea, but sports fields are clay, and the minute it rains, we all get emails at council saying these sports fields are closed for the next 4 or 5 days. So what we're doing is actually digging down, removing the clay, replacing it with a well-drained filter media, putting grass on top, and allowing water to percolate down through that sand, and then returning most of that clean water back to the creek systems. Look, this is not a new idea. I think Baden worked on this project in a past life in New South Wales. This is a sand filter at Kiama. Project has been up and running for about 10 years and it's working really well. It harvests stormwater. It's located in a really important public open space on this pretty New South Wales coastal town. We then took that idea and applied it to a mainstream urban development for Mirvac. So what you're looking at there is actually a grassy bioretention system. We're not sterilising any of the space. It's really nicely landscaped and it's a really great space to be in. So just an example of one of the treatment systems. It's the largest one, in fact. It will be applied to almost an 800 hectare catchment. It's actually located in an area of the council that won't be subject to any urban renewal at all. So in effect, with a different policy, we'd never get funding to do anything in this location. It's also, the downstream receiving water is quite sensitive. And again, if we had an on-site policy, we would never be able to do anything to address water quality to protect this sensitive receiving water here. Sorry, just to go back, you can see there's a large number of sports fields there, and part of the proposal includes harvesting the water to irrigate all of these sports fields in the green area. So there's a concrete lined channel on the left. We're proposing to pump water out of that channel and up into this hatched area over here, which is a basin. It will be a grassy bioretention system, or it could be a more traditional bioretention system. We are proposing to distribute the water using hydrocon pipes. They're permeable concrete pipes. They're easily maintainable. They're the pipes they've been using at Kiama for 10 years with quite a lot of success. We've got the storage underneath the filter media in Atlantis cells. In terms of costs, this system is not small. It will cost $7.4 million with a life cycle cost of $12.4 million. The capital cost in terms of nitrogen removal, though, is incredibly cheap. It's $3,300 to remove each kilogram of nitrogen, which is about half of Melbourne Water's offset. The really interesting thing with this project, the volume of water that we can harvest from the system is about 113 megalitres. And the value of that water is $250,000, which pretty much equals the maintenance costs of that system. So instead of buying $250,000 worth of water from Sydney Water, we harvest the water, we pocket, and use that money to pay for maintenance of the system. In terms of the energy consumption, pumps don't actually consume that much power. It's relatively easy to offset their power consumption. So, it is also kind of a greenhouse neutral system. That's another example, proposing a co-located treatment system on a cricket field. We'll be pumping water out of this pipe up into a CDS unit, and then distributing that water around in a ring main and allowing it to pond onto that field. Another example, just illustrating the concept further. So I guess it's important to note that what I've just shown you, the systems address water quality. They don't address waterway stability in any way. Of the extra 1.14 gigalitres of water to go down those creeks, we can harvest only 300 megalitres. So, there's another 900 megalitres that's going to go down without any management at all. What we can do, though, is we do have an on-site detention policy, and that on-site detention policy has now been tweaked to make sure that it also achieves waterway stability outcomes. So, and I think John Argue had a leading role involved in the development of this policy. In terms of stream erosion index, adopting, the new policy that John influenced, we can achieve a stream erosion index of 1.5, which is almost at our stretch target of 1. So, in terms of, the beneficial effect on water quality, we certainly achieve the best practice targets, or the modelling predicts we will certainly achieve the best practice targets. But in terms of those urban renewal precincts, we actually go more than, we improve the water quality more than the current water quality. Sorry, I'm not speaking I'm engineer speak here. We're actually reducing the pollutant loads beyond the current levels by quite a considerable amount. So, for example, if TSS was 100 tonnes today, it will be 50 tonnes after this proposal. So we're halving those loads, and we're, reducing the nutrient loads by about 40% compared to current levels. In terms of costs, so we're asking for contributions from developers to pay for the scheme. Those contributions are levied on a rate per hectare. They're, depending on where you are, they're $82,000 a hectare or $63,000 a hectare. in some way, council's a big loser because council will now have to take on the maintenance of those schemes. The cost of that will be reduced massively by the water savings, but council is also committed to funding the maintenance, and that will be $600,000 a year. The biggest winners will be the mums and dads and the business owners who won't have to pay for on-site maintenance anymore. Not that they ever did or would have. But in pure economic terms, that will be a saving of $3.8 million a year. So there's a very clear business case to support the off-site argument here. $600,000 versus $3.8 million. And that's the ongoing life cycle cost. If you look at the capital cost, it's much cheaper for developers, so they're pretty happy about it too. It provides a lot more certainty for the developers. The developments are being approved more rapidly. And I guess I've already mentioned it's going to help council save 300 million litres of water per year. In terms of the total nitrogen costs to remove each kilogram of nitrogen, the scheme will cost $5,900, which is a bit cheaper than Melbourne Water's offset, $6,645. We wanted to benchmark these costs against the current on-site costs. So we looked at a range of developments. We actually got construction costs from various suppliers for those developments, and we compared that against the contributions those developers would otherwise have to pay. And you can see, in all cases, it works out much cheaper, and on average, it's about 40% cheaper. So what development does it apply to? It applies to medium and high density residential development, including attached housing and any subdivisions. It applies to most business and industrial development greater than 150 square metres, which is most business and industrial development. Single dwellings, dual locks, group homes, boarding houses, childcare centres are exempt. There was a lot of politics around this. It got very politically hot, and we figured sometimes it was easier to just agree to the councillors' requests. For example, dual locks, we realised we would be giving up something like $100,000 in contributions by exempting them, and it wasn't a problem. That all of those 11 projects, are valued at $56 million. So giving up $100,000, wasn't a problem. So we'll be implementing the scheme in two ways. In the pink area, there's a contribution plan where it's mandatory to make a contribution. In the blue areas, we don't yet have a contribution plan in place. So there's a voluntary scheme whereby developers can elect to make a contribution to council through a voluntary planning agreement, or they can construct the works on site. So far, we've had 100% electing to pay the contribution. But, a recent innovation by the industry, one filter cartridge manufacturer is now offering developers a lease arrangement. So the developers don't have to pay anything, and the full cost is borne by the mums and dads and the body corporates. That is much more attractive than paying council a contribution. So in conclusion, we think offset schemes can work well in infill areas. We've got the big challenge of actually building these systems now and operating them. Council's capacity is building all the time, so we're reasonably confident that we can do that. The whole system will save something like $100 million over the next 50 years. And there's massive economies of scale and also carbon reduction in terms of avoided transport. Think about thousands of vehicle movements associated with maintaining or not maintaining small stormwater treatment systems, across many distributed sites versus several vehicle movements to maintain 11 systems. A big bonus with this is that the value in the water that we're going to harvest, which will offset or nearly offset the cost of maintenance of the schemes. Thank you.